If you've never experienced a near suicidal depressive breakdown, I can tell you what it's like. I had one 5 years ago. Now, hopefully this isn't you, but looking back, I know it was the best thing that could have happened to me. Because up till then, I was just like every other clueless entrepreneur, maniacally focused on success, but ignoring all the signs, moving nonstop from one guru get-rich scheme to another, yet still completely in the dark about what I was supposed to do with my life. But as they say, that was then, this is now, and if you can hear my voice, then you and I both know we are ready to get serious about living the life we love, not just existing in it. But how do we do it? Join me as I work with hundreds of entrepreneurs just like you to learn their insider secrets, what's working now, and more importantly, what hasn't. All to help you, the struggling entrepreneur, decode what's keeping you stuck, enabling you to live better, accomplish more, and truly become the person you want to be. Hi, my name is Brian Forsyth, and welcome to Radically Unstuck. All right. Hey, welcome to Radically Unstuck. My name is Brian Forsyth. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the podcast. I want to remind you, this is not just a podcast. This is not just a show. This is a movement, a moment that you decide to move forward towards that life that you would dearly fight for, the one that you dearly want to live. That is the purpose of this podcast. And I want to tell you, we have a fantastic guest today, Karl Shallowhorn. He is pretty phenomenal. He's done many different things. As you will find out, he has a lot of good information, and we're going to talk a lot about bipolar addictions and addictions in general, and mental health tools. Just a little bit about Karl. He's, as I said, he knows a lot about bipolar. He's been dealing with it for quite a while, and I appreciate him being on and coming on and helping us. He is the New York State credentialed alcoholism and substance abuse counselor, and he's been working in that field for 17 years, doing the good work, as it were. He's also an author. His book is Working on Wellness, A Practical Guide to Mental Health. And who doesn't need that, right? A practical guide to mental health. He is a certified mental health first aid instructor. And with that, I'm not going to spoil it for you anymore. Go ahead, Karl. Tell us a little bit about who you are and why you do what you do.
Well, thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me on the show. And I like your idea of just getting the message out and letting people know, as I like to say, that recovery is possible. And of course, I certainly know what it means to be stuck. Of course, your show is Radically Unstuck, and that's where we all want to be. And I've definitely been stuck. So I thank you for that message. So first of all, I had my first episode living with bipolar disorder back in 1981, long time ago. I was a college freshman at school in Michigan, a college known as General Motors Institute. And basically it was this trifecta of being away from home, drugs and alcohol, and the stress of school that all came together and culminated me having this major psychotic episode, the suicide attempt. It was not pretty. It was a horrible experience. I still remember it vividly, very traumatic. But that basically began my journey with mental illness. And then I spent probably the next 7 or 8 years, cycling in and out of hospitals. I came back home to Buffalo, where I'm at now, cycling in and out of these hospitals, including one which is known as the Buffalo Psychiatric Center, which still is in existence today, has probably some of the most ill people, that you can imagine there. I was there when I was like 20 and 21 years old. I received electroconvulsive therapy when I was there.
Oh man,
and
no way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's crazy.
So in fact, you talk about being unstuck. So that was a period when I was in a very low depression. Of course, so our listeners can understand with bipolar disorder, there's mania and also depression. So it's not just like what people often think about, this people, flying high and feeling good. There's also the depression comes with it. And I experienced a significant period of depression that I just couldn't get out of. So seeing that I wasn't responding to the medication that was being delivered, they decided to try, I say they, the physicians and staff, they decided to try, ECT, as it's known as. And I had a series of 6. And somehow, miraculously, I guess you could say, it helped. It got me out of that state of depression. But what we know is that with ECT, they don't really know why it works. They know it does work, and it's been used for many years and still used today, as a matter of fact, for people who are medication resistant. Yeah. And that's really where it kind of got started. And then eventually, just to cut a real long story short, in 1988, I was still dabbling with drugs, and I was in counseling. I'd managed to graduate from college, but my counselor just said, "Hey, listen, you go to a 12-step program, you go to rehab, or you end up back in the hospital." I'm like, "Well, I'm not going to go to rehab. I don't want to do that. And I don't want to, tell my boss I have a drug problem. I don't want to go back to the hospital." So I decided to go with the 12-step program. And that's really what changed my life almost overnight. And that was in 1988. I've been involved ever since. And it's been a real big part of my own recovery from both my addiction and my mental illness. And it's just a big part of what makes me who I am today.
So I'm curious, what specifically about the 12-step program? Because, there are a lot of people that have been through it, are still working with it, and it definitely has its detractors. So what was it exactly that sort of instantly opened your eyes? Was it the fact that you had like a buddy riding with you to sort of keep you accountable, or what was it?
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, Brian, you hit the nail on the head right there. So one of the first things I had to do was, when I got involved, was just to separate myself from the as I said, the people, places, and things that were, involved with my addiction. So I had to kind of just, get rid of those toxic people. But then I replaced them with healthier people, not the healthiest all the time, but healthier, through the program. And we developed some really close friendships. So I was developed these new friendships that I relied on, but also kind of grew up. I was, when I entered the program, I was 25, still young enough that I could learn some things and grow into some things. But it was, that accountability, the sponsorship, and then, the things that go with that were really essential in terms of me kind of getting back on track, but also discovering where my potential was. I mean, even early in recovery, I knew I could do something with my life. I just didn't know what it was. But the program, as I say, it kind of gave me this roadmap to follow and to develop myself as an individual, my relationships, my ability to serve others, all came from that.
Yeah, and I think that for me anyway, the serving others, it's one of the things that consistently, it was the thing that really kept me focused and moving when I was recovering from my mental breakdown. I just became like this. I became the depression guy, and instead of hiding it, which is what I had done, I didn't actually know that I had depression, but that's I sort of felt there was something wrong, but I just kept sort of pushing through. And once I was sort of functional again, I just sort of, I became like the dude. I told everybody, because I didn't want it to be a secret anymore. And so did you find so much freedom there? Did you see that too when you sort of said, okay, is it really freeing to say, okay, this is me, I have this thing, and I'm not living in shame with it anymore?
Well, it's so funny. I'm laughing here inside of hearing your story. So I went through that, but many years later. So like I said, I got clean in 88, went through some ups and downs. I got married in 1992. I've still been married to my wife, Susie, for 26 years.
All right.
Daughters.
Shout out.
Yeah, man. It's incredible. So but in 1995, I'm working. So I got a job as a counselor in 1995 at Buffalo General Hospital. But then I had another manic episode because of the medication change. And as a result of that, I kind of struggled for a few months. I took some time off, came back, and I changed professions and went into higher education, where I was for 12 years. And virtually nobody in that 12 years knew I had a mental health condition or even lived with addiction. So, but towards the end of that time, it was right around 2008. Remember the whole Britney Spears thing that came out back then, when she was acting out and people were kind of suspecting that she might have some issues? Well, that's when I decided to write an article that ended up in the Buffalo News. There's an op-ed piece. In other words, why don't we hear more positive stories of people in the media living with mental illness?
Right.
So not just like celebrities, but anybody. But then I outed myself.
Oh,
right. I outed myself as a person with bipolar disorder.
Right.
And so that's a huge way. And even my wife was like, well, know about your daughter's names in it, our daughter's names in it. Be careful because of stigma, right?
Right.
Stigma. But I was so naive because I hadn't really dealt with it because I'd been okay for a long time. But that's really what launched me, Brian, into advocacy work. So from that point on, I began reaching out to organizations like the National Alliance on Mental Illness and the Western New York Children's Psychiatric Center and some other advocates, and just began like doing self-advocacy work and really kind of do my own thing until finally I linked up with the behavioral health agency where I had received treatment and began doing a group with them once a week for an hour, which actually my book was entitled, based on working on wellness. And then that ended up eventually becoming a full-time job, work at the clinic as a addiction specialist. So it kind of came full circle, but, it did take time and it did take some risk, a big risk.
That taking the risk, that's something that, can you help us understand that? Because small risk, big risk, tiny risk. People just, it's hard for people to take that step. So kind of help us understand, what about that.
In my experience, Brian, first and foremost, I was established, okay, when I did this. In other words, I'd been doing fine. Like I said, the last manic episode I've ever had, Brian, in my life was 1995.
Mm-hmm.
And then 13 years later, not like 6 months or 1 year, 13 years later, I decided to open up to people about it. So it wasn't like I just up and decided, hey, let me tell the world with being out of hospital for 30 years. Because sometimes that's what people think they need to do. It took a lot of time. I had to really make sure I was okay. But honestly, I'll be very honest, I was a little naive. If I had to do it all over again, I might have done it differently. I might not have spoken up like I did. But I was just like, maybe it was, divine intervention, whatever you want to call it. But I think at that time, and even I worked at a small college campus of only like 2,500 students, very small. And, so everybody knew everybody. So when this article ended up in the paper, it did cause a stir. But in the same respect, that was also the catalyst for me moving out of higher education back to behavioral health, because I did have a conversation with the vice president of enrollment management who I worked under, who pretty much said to me, hey, Karl, if this isn't your passion, meaning higher education, you need to find out what it is. In other words, if this isn't for you, if you want to go back into behavioral health, then you need to do that. And that's what I did immediately. Luckily, I had a contact. Luckily, I was able to change my career. Not everybody can do that, right? Not everybody can just say, well, I'm going to leave this to go to that. I had a backup plan. And it worked out incredibly well. So I consider myself to be very fortunate. But in the same respect, there's other ways to be open and honest and advocates. So certainly, you can vote, you can write a blog under a pen name, even you can do a lot of things to make your voice heard. And another thing too, let me say real quickly, Brian, I'm the chair of the Erie County Anti-Stigma Coalition, and our goal is to eliminate stigma. So we ask people to take the pledge against stigma at our website, which is letstalkstigma.org. You go onto the website, you put in your email address. It's not published publicly, but you're adding your name to the pledge. You can opt in for the monthly newsletter, which is more Erie County, New York based, but still it has valuable information. We're doing a Facebook Live actually this Thursday on reopening with schools. So, we're doing a lot of good things, but there's a lot of things that people can do that make them feel like empowered and make them feel like they're making a difference. And they don't have to tell the whole world, but at least they're doing something so they feel like that they're not just sitting on the sidelines. And I think people want to get involved with, especially if they feel like they're being successful with it.
I know that that's one of the things I talk about in the book is to act against, if it's depression, if it's anxiety, I always felt like it was important to however you can to move against, sort of what the depressive voice or a depressive inclination says, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so did you experience that when you first started stepping out and, sort of you raised your hand? Was there a certain amount of release that you were no longer hiding it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Now, mind you, when I first started, it was liberating. It was liberating because I didn't have to walk around, like in the shadows or keeping it secret. Mind you, it still took some time. So I became comfortable, continuing opening up. I'd still say in some circles, that I would kind of couch the language, right? I wouldn't say it, fully openly, but then it became more natural, more common. And then, but nowadays, man, I of course, mind you, I'm pretty, I do a lot of media here locally. I do a lot of things that this has really come to be my, an advantage I have, that I have no problem sharing with people, my whole family. I mean, everybody I know knows it, and things. So I'm once again in a different situation, but I had to evolve into that. It wasn't like I just up one day and just the sky opened. But in terms of being freed from it, absolutely. It's so funny. I like Prince, the musical artist, and he has a song "Free," right? And that's it's a wonderful song if you've ever heard it. But it's about being free, to not just to about someone else's demands, but to what you believe in, to be free as a human being. And even though we have a lot of restrictions around us these days, you can still be free, because when you talk about being free, you're free in your own mind. Right, despite everything. I mean, that's all. So I'll give you an example. Like we all know who Nelson Mandela is.
Yeah.
Right. Nelson Mandela, was in jail in South Africa for over 25 years. He was freed and became the leader of South Africa. How do you stay in prison for 25 years and not lose your mind? Right.
Right.
But he maintained a sense of freedom while he was there in his mind.
Yeah.
And so you've been hospitalized. Right.
Yeah.
I've been hospitalized, and that is definitely like being in jail, because you're locked behind a door. You can't get out when you want to. So you have to maintain some sense of concept, at least, that you're free. And you may not even made it seem to be that way at the time. But looking back then in those days, I still felt like I was capable. Because that's the thing, too, as you and I both know, you have to feel capable of being able to recover from whatever you're dealing with.
Yeah.
You have to have hope.
You have to see it possible. You have to be able to, that's, because possibility defines reality, because literally if you don't see it as possible, then even if it's right in front of your face, because, you've done, done a lot of research, and you've done studies, and, you've sort of lived in that world. So you're familiar with all the different, research they've done that shows that literally, if you don't think it's possible, if you don't expect to see it, like I remember that experiment where they were like passing basketballs around, and then like this dude in an ape suit like walked through the whole thing, and then they asked him about the guy in the ape suit. Nobody saw the dude in the ape suit. Like it was.
I've seen it.
You remember that one?
Yep.
It's like, what? How does that happen? But it's because literally, if it is what you expect that determines your reality in such a real way. So talking about your reality, let's talk a little bit about, what bipolar is for you, and some of the ways that you have grown much more capable and able to beat it.
In my experience, Brian, my diagnosis, and let me say first and foremost, we throw around the term diagnosis. And so when anyone gets a mental health diagnosis, first of all, it can be detrimental to a person, because then you think, oh, I've got this label that I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life, especially if you're a young person. If you're in your teens, it could be debilitating. It could be scary. But you have to remember what a diagnosis is. It's used first and foremost by clinicians to identify maybe what the problem is and how to approach the problem and strategies. It's used by psychiatrists to identify, okay, maybe these are approaches we need to take, maybe if you need medication. But then also, Brian, there's insurance companies, right? If you have a diagnosis, you want to get treatment, you have to have a diagnosis to get billed for the treatment. Like they have to bill for it, right? So there's a few different things involved there. But bipolar disorder is one in which a person experiences highs and lows. So you have a period of mania followed by a period of depression. So I have bipolar disorder type 1, which means that I have that real high followed by a much longer period of a depression. So mine, for instance, was like, say, 2 weeks of a mania, in which I eventually crashed into 3 months of a depression. That was like the average.
So could you tell, like, did you have any clues as far as when you're going to shift, or is it just like, oh, and then bam, you're one or the other?
Well, that's funny that you say that because it was very sneaky, right? Like I remember the last one I had that time long ago, it was happening, but I fully didn't realize. So I didn't realize because I was hypomanic first. And hypomanic is when you're getting some of the symptoms, say like, not as much sleep or these grandiose ideas or just overactivity or whatever. And it sneaks up on you. So you don't fully realize you're in it, but it feels good. Right. Oh. So you go with it. But then eventually it could go off the rails, as they say, and then you could have a full-blown manic episode. And that's what happened to me. And so, but to many people, it happens very quickly, and sometimes you do know it's coming, but you still feel powerless to do anything about it. And that's the thing that's also scary is people don't know sometimes how to intervene. So really, in my case, I had that experience, and I had to get that immediate intervention, which for me was, actually getting hospitalized, but I signed myself out against medical advice, as they say. That was like something that I wouldn't advise someone to do, but I did, and I convalesced at home. I still was followed up with a psychiatrist and medication and everything. In fact, I had a medication change or actually increase because of that immediately. But I had the resources too. That was another thing too, Brian. Not everybody has resources to be able to get immediate treatment that way. So that's another thing that you have to consider. But back to the idea of what the disorder is like. Some people experience, there's a condition called bipolar type 2. And that's when a person might have more longer periods of depression with brief periods of, say, hypomania, not full-blown mania. So the emphasis is more on the depression, but there's still some mania in there. But then there's rapid cycling, which is when a person can have those ups and downs over a couple of days or even within a day, like up and down. Like, so imagine that, like you're on this little roller coaster in a day or two or three. That is very scary. It's also very hard to manage.
Yeah, I can imagine being like, like that would be absolutely no fun. So I know you said that you were on medication. What were you taking at the time?
So lithium, which is an old school, long-standing medication. In fact, it's still in some cases used for bipolar disorder. It's a mood stabilizer. And so that's what I was taking, along with another medication called Mellaril. The generic name is thiridazine. It's the same classification as Thorazine, or the generic name is chlorpromazine. So you hear about Thorazine, right? You think, oh my God, Thorazine. Well, my story is I got changed from lithium to Depakote eventually, and then because just some issues I had there. And then also I had to change from Mellaril to Thorazine or chlorpromazine because I couldn't find it. See, like these, Thorazine and Mellaril, those are called first generation antipsychotics. This is stuff going back to like the 60s and even the late 50s and 70s. Many people don't even get these anymore. So they're not being produced as much. So most people these days who get prescribed drugs are getting these called second generation antipsychotics. But you see like Latuda, you see these advertisements on TV for all these new drugs. These are the ones that people are getting now. And so, but for me, that's what I had to take. And I still take medication. I also take Wellbutrin for depression. I take a combination of things. The thing to remember, though, Brian, is that medication is very much different for everyone. What works for me might not work for you. It also might take time to find what works ultimately. And that's what people get a little bit impatient about. They feel like it's not working quickly enough or they're not getting the results quickly enough. They get frustrated. They get side effects like weight gain. So can be some unpleasurable effects. But in the end, as I had to make the decision a long time ago, what do I cherish more? My mind, right? Sometimes it's your mind or your body. And so for me, I want my mind. I can always work around the body, right? But my mind, I got to have my mind. And so I decided a long time ago, that's why I wanted to go with medication, because at least, with my mind, I can make better decisions. I can be clear. I can work. I can do all these things. And that's what's critical.
So what would you say to somebody who is a little bit worried about taking, the drugs and all those types of things, that, like, what would you say to them I mean, do you feel like sort of everybody should try the drugs, or do you think that there's a certain class of people that maybe they should try cognitive behavioral therapy or some of the other non-medicinal options?
Well, first and foremost, Brian, first of all, it depends on the severity of the condition. So a person could have, say, like, anxiety, depression. You could have a mild case of anxiety or mild case of depression. That's absolutely where you go to the non-medication, talk therapies, as we say, like cognitive behavioral therapy, things like that you talked about, with a clinician to kind of talk through the issues. And many times you can develop strategies to learn to how to overcome those problems you might have. Also, another thing you have to consider is that sometimes when people are dealing with these things, it might be a case where they don't know, where to begin. They don't know who to talk to. So one of the first things I suggest is just go to your primary care physician and talk to them. They might say, well, I want to refer you to a professional. And then, but also if that person's apprehensive about taking medication, I would say certainly, it's a last resort kind of thing. I mean, I would always tell someone to go without the medication if they can. However, if it's a case like bipolar disorder or even schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, the really serious, major, severe mental illnesses, medication may be absolutely necessary. Now, mind you, there's some people that still argue that. There's still some people out there who feel that you shouldn't take medication for anything. But, in my own personal estimation, I would be very cautious about going that route just because of the unpredictability. But if you're talking about anxiety, depression, and other types of mood disorders, certainly go for the non-medication approach first, and let's see where that goes. And then if you're not getting the results that you need, then you might want to approach medication. But it all should be done in the consultation of a professional.
You're talking about, professional help, as it were, and your experience with the shock therapy, and I'm guessing shock therapy that, I don't know whether or not it was something that you completely agreed to, or, I got to tell you, if it was shock therapy or not shock therapy, I would probably be pretty against shock therapy. But talking about your experience with shock therapy and some of the extremes, did you ever question whether or not you were on the right path, and how did you resolve that?
That was a long time ago. That was in 1982. And I'll tell you something, Brian. At that time, I was pretty much oblivious to my mental health problem. I was still in such a state of just disarray, so say mentally and emotionally. I didn't know, my what from a hole in the ground sometimes, I think.
Right.
But the bottom line is that when I was in the hospital in Buffalo Psychiatric Center, it was, I guess you could say, strongly encouraged, if not almost forced on me. I kind of almost had no choice in the matter. And I don't want to make it seem like they strapped me down and tied me down and all that stuff. I mean, I had to eventually say, okay, I was reluctant, very reluctant. But then again, shortly, after beginning these treatments, I got better. And so that's why I was like, okay, I guess this is working. And I continued to do it. But then they stopped once I got to that place where I seemed to be having some improvement. So, as I said, it was brief. It was a short period of time. I've never had them since. So really, like I said, this is a very personal, individualized experience. You can't, cast the entire experience to everyone. Everyone experiences differently. So that some people out there might be having difficulty with medication, especially if they're experiencing depression. Now, I'm not saying that you go ahead and run out and say, hey, give me ECT, but it might be recommended. And just so you know, it's done these days very safely in safe environment, at least in the Buffalo area. I know there's one hospital that still does it, and they do it very safe. In fact, someone I know very close to me, gets it done because he's had trouble with medication. He does it. He has a full-time job. Dare I say he's a clinician.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And so he knows like me, he knows, he's an LCSW, he's a licensed clinical social worker. So he knows, but it's work for him. And so what I'm saying that is that don't jump to conclusions. Do your research. Absolutely. Do your research. Do your homework. But don't jump to the conclusion immediately and say, oh, I can't do this. It's scary. It won't work. I mean, you always have the right to a second opinion. You always right to say and question, okay, why are we doing this? But don't just write it off saying that, oh, I saw One Flew the Cuckoo's Nest. So I don't want to be like, the character in that movie, because that was a horrible representation of ECT. If you've ever seen the film.
So what did it feel like to be shocked the first time?
Well, I'll just put it this way. Essentially, you're given a sedative, sodium pentothal, and mind you, you are, they do hold you down to the table, because what it does is it's a very small amount of voltage or shock, so to speak, that goes into your brain. They put the paddles on the outside, and it's attached. You're given this shot, but they also put something in your mouth so that you don't bite your tongue. But it induces a small seizure. That's what it does physically. But then again, you don't feel it because you're out. You're anesthetized, so you don't feel it.
So you're completely out when it happens.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
As opposed to One Flew the Cuckoo's Nest, where, that didn't happen that way, and that's a horrible representation of it.
It's my only experience that, and there was this. I was in high school psychology class, and they showed us this video of a lobotomy.
Oh no!
And they're like, we're not sure why it works, but it works. And I'm like,
yeah, but let me say this about lobotomies. So first of all, you got to remember there's a really actually interesting book that I recommend called Mad in America, written by Robert Whitaker. It's actually the history of schizophrenia treatment in the United States. But what he does is he goes back to colonial times and talks about how severe mental illness was treated through the years. They did some if you look back on them, they did some very inhumane things to people, even through the 40s and 50s with lobotomy, where they basically go into a person and remove part of the prefrontal lobe. Scary stuff. Now, will we do that today? No, absolutely not. It's inhumane. People might say the same thing about ECT. Well, it's done in a safe way that, at least for now, we think that helps. It doesn't. Mind you, hey, 10, 20 years from now, we may find something better and different. Hopefully we do, right? But right now, this is one thing we have. It seems to work. But I think the whole idea, though, is that we work best with what we have. And so you have to also have some trust and some faith that whatever approaches you're going to take will work. Not to say that, you go in and you just go blindly into it. I'm not saying that, but you have to believe you can get better, because that's a big part of it too.
So speaking of unbelievable things, have you ever heard of the wandering uterus theory?
No, I'm not.
That, believe it or not, was a Freud idea. And he said that women would go nuts, at certain times of the month, because their uterus, would have left their body. And it's known as the wandering uterus theory.
Interesting.
And and that's one of the really out there concepts. But I mean, if you really look at out there, I mean, I think it was Jung, and the collective unconscious. If you've probably heard of the collective unconscious, and so that, if you look at that, I mean, collective unconscious, I mean, that's like pretty out there as far as, mainstream psychology goes.
Right.
And just for the, people listening. So the collective unconscious is this idea that we all sort of share this pool of unconscious input with the idea that we might even be able to tap into it, or are, actually tapping into it as we speak.
Right.
Which is, I honestly don't know how that fits in with the mind body problem. I don't know if you know about the mind body, problem and the logical fallacists in 1953, but it's just interesting to me. I always thought that the collective unconscious, along with the wandering uterus theory and a few other aspects of psychology, it kind of made me feel like of the sciences, that one was one of the cool ones, because in mathematics, it's all like cut and dry, like 2 + 2 is, whatever the number. And, but then you've got psychology, because it's not surprising, because psychology, they're dealing with the mind, and you can't see the mind. So you kind of have to, figure things out. Unlike, if you're like working on the brain or something, you can actually like see and see functionality. So talking about things that work and different treatment methods, I guess one of the big things right now occurring is treatment with DMT and acid and or LSD, shrooms. How do you feel about that? Have you seen anything regarding that in your current work?
So I'm glad you talked about that, because now, mind you, I'm basing this on some interviews I've heard. I haven't read a lot on it, but I have heard from experts in these fields. And this is what I was talking about before that. I said there are some things in development that might take over for the more traditional types of treatment, right? So, if you talk about ketamine and LSD and things like that, these are the things that people are experimenting with right now to learn how to help people with severe depression and other types of mental health conditions. Now, let me just say this. You talk about LSD and things of that sort, psilocybin and mushrooms and all that. That's not for people who have experienced psychosis. In other words, that's not for me, right? Because that will likely trigger this person to develop a major psychotic episode. I would highly discourage that. So when they talk about these treatments, it's typically for people, first of all, who are very well screened, but who have had no history of any type of delusional, hallucinatory, psychotic history, because you have to be really careful. Now, there have been examples where I've heard people where it's been a life changer. They said, I've never experienced anything like this before. It's virtually cured me. And you know what? I'm not going to discount that. We also know, though, that what works for one person doesn't work for another. In other words, we still need more research. But remember this, too. These drugs were considered illegal for many, many, many years. Mm-hmm. So they couldn't do research on them. So it wasn't until just recently that they were beginning to reinstitute research to find out how they work. So in many ways, we're playing catch up, I think, with these drugs to see how effective they are. But I think, listen, I'm open. If it's done properly, if it's done ethically, and it's done in a way to help people. I'm never into the idea of just giving someone something just to give it a shot. No, we have to make sure that we're informed about what we do and how we help people. Because the last thing we want to do is get that person, going in the wrong direction, or especially do something that harms them. I mean, that's the whole idea. Do no harm. That's the physician's motto, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you never want to harm a person by what you prescribe to them.
Have you ever heard of ayahuasca?
No.
Oh man. So this is the craziest thing about ayahuasca. This ayahuasca is like the end all be all. Like, imagine if you took acid and like it was 100 times as powerful as acid. Like this is far outside of just a normal acid trip. This is ayahuasca, right? And the coolest thing about ayahuasca is one, that a lot of people are saying that it literally has, cured them and changed their life, and they are no longer the same. But then ayahuasca is actually made. It comes from these African tribes, and it's not like they just go and get like a herb and throw it in a pot and boil it up like it's some mushrooms. Ayahuasca has to be made, and it's a 3-part process. And it has, it's literally like if you took a recipe for ayahuasca, it would have like 37 steps. And starting with how deep the pot has to be, because there's like these levels that you have to, and this is somebody in Africa, like some, like dude, African bushman came up with a 37-step process, like this herb and that herb and this bush and this process, and it has to be at this heat. And it's not just one tribe that knows how to make this stuff. There are like at least 3 different varieties of ayahuasca, different whole tribes in different places that know how to make ayahuasca. And it's like, how did they come up with, like, you're just walking down the trail and you're like, oh, there's that herb, and there's that thing, and I'm going to put it together this way. And then how, it just blows my mind that anybody, came up with this concoction.
So how did they come up with Xanax? How did they come up with Valium? Right? Think about this. Same process, right? They probably did some R&D, research and development.
Yeah, can't you imagine going to the African tribes, right? Like, and this is our R&D department.
No, but I'm just saying though. I'm not serious. I'm being absolutely serious here. People discount, indigenous cultures, but we're talking about folks who, what they're doing has probably done, even dare I say, probably centuries before, what's been done here in the West. And so that's also another thing too that we didn't even get into, was how indigenous cultures, deal with issues of mental illness, and how say shaman and folks like that are revered.
Yeah.
In these cultures. So it's we have to think that just because we do it this way, it doesn't mean it's the only way. So getting back to the Ishkasha therapy or medication you're talking about, this is something that was probably developed, like I said, a long time ago. And you know what? It probably came from experimentation, from just sometimes people just, accidentally discover things. But the point is that they discovered it worked, and they kind of went through this stepwise system over time, and now they have something that is, does work, and it's been shared, and each tribe or each group has their own variation. But I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear that I find it fascinating. I find it amazing, and I definitely understand how it's possible. I do not think of the, just because we appear to be the end state, right? I don't think that we are, necessarily comparatively farther along than any other culture. Our technology, we've got cell phones and stuff. And as far as we know, nobody's ever had cell phones. But, if you start looking at our history and you start looking at some of the different, things in the world that nobody can really explain, I feel like, there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of things that have gone on that nobody really can explain too well.
Yep.
I think the last thing I saw, so this is the crazy thing. So talking about, this is completely not on the topic, but it'll be fun. So at the top of the Pyramid of Giza is a 300-ton rock. 300 tons of rock. So not only do you have to construct the whole thing, but then you have to figure out how to lift a 300-ton piece of rock to put it 300 feet in the air. and suspend
Perfectly.
it and support it. And it's
Right.
like, and then of course, they have, like, even with our modern technology and all of our understanding, if you gave somebody enough money to do it, they still couldn't construct, a perfect replica of the Pyramid of Giza.
Right.
Like, and it's like, I believe in aliens. I'm just going to tell y'all, like, I believe in alien technology. I believe we are, we weren't the first person on this planet. And, I believe that there's too much stuff out there that we are like the only, I don't know. How do you feel about that there, Karl?
Well, I think, well, the whole idea of the pyramids and so forth, the Egyptians, I have the beliefs that I subscribe to, which go back to Atlantean times.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So these are some things I've read and I've studied that, and of course, we're really getting off the topic here.
Oh, yeah, it's all right.
but basically, I've read and I do subscribe to that. So if you believe that Atlantis existed, there were people from Atlantis who then took their knowledge of the world, of science, of the universe, and gave that to the Egyptians, who then gave it to the Greeks, and so on and so forth. But the Egyptians were amazing people, as you know. They had science. They invented beer, for Christ's sake. But they were amazing people who did things that, just like you said, we couldn't even replicate today with our own technology. I mean, they created papyrus. They created, a lot of things that of course, are many centuries old. Before Christian era, as they say.
Yeah, they had a battery.
Yeah, well, the whole thing is that, and also look at astronomy, and you look at things like that. I mean, like the pyramids were specifically set up for astronomy too.
Yeah, I think what's interesting
and astrology, for that matter.
So this may have gotten off a little bit of the topic, but I think the topic remains the same, which is the power of the human, right? The power of we as a human race to do big things and do things that defy reality in a lot of instances, right? But it all starts with what? It starts with belief. And so, I think that's really the message.
Right. So like when I was really sick, right, I began to have hope. I began to do creative visualization.
Oh, yeah.
Of the person that I wanted to be. In other words, like closing my eyes and seeing that image of myself, where I was, what I was wearing, what I was doing. And I use that as a means of kind of becoming that person. It's almost like a manifestation kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
But also the idea of human potential, right? When I first got into 12-step recovery, I discovered, or at least I didn't discover, I came to believe that human beings have far greater potential than even we know we have. And the further you go in developing your potential, the more potential you have, right? In other words, we talk about self-actualization. I mean, that is the goal, but in the end, I don't know if we ever fully self-actualize, because every time we get there, there's more to go. But that's also when it comes into mental health. Like for me, I've been living with this for like more than 2/3 of my life. I've developed a lot of skills, a lot of tools. I know how to keep healthy. I know myself well. But it doesn't mean I still struggle from time to time, but I know how to intervene. I know how to take care of myself. I have enough insight to know how to take care of myself. So when things get rough, I can stay on the path.
And that's really one of the big deals, right? Is that we keep track of where we've been and we pay attention, to where we've been.
Right.
Because isn't it so difficult to forget to do that, and to just keep moving forward and moving forward. And I know, my struggles with depression, it gets really hard because you're, especially if you're dealing with like, really crushing depression and, major depressive disorder, and you're trying to, every day you're trying to get better. Every day you're just wanting to get better. And then it lifts. And once it's gone, you're like, oh my God, this is so awesome.
Right.
And then, if you're not paying attention, and this is something I talk about in the book, is to really pay attention to where you are, in your cycles, so to speak. Then, it can kind of creep back up if you're not paying attention. Did you see some of that? Is it like, because you say that you really haven't had any major episodes in 13 years. So is it now something where you're just really, really cognizant of what it sort of feels like when things start shifting, and you kind of watch it closer, or like, how does that work?
Yeah. I mean, I just know myself well. I know when I'm getting overstressed. I know when I'm pushing too hard. I know when I can't sleep, what to do. I know these things. Plus, I have a support system, Brian. Don't forget, I have a wife that I've been with now. We've been married 26 years, but we've known each other for over 28. She knows me like a book. When I start, kind of getting off kilter, she calls me on it. So I'm very fortunate there too. And so, I mean, I've got a built-in system of accountability in my life. But that said, in the end, I'm still the one who's ultimately responsible for myself, what I do, and all that. And that's taken time and maturity. It's taken experience. And frankly, it's been a lifetime of learning. But also, it's hard work. I mean, this is not easy. I mean, just to get up every day, as you know, can be a challenge. So we know that, for instance, if you're going to dedicate yourself to a life of recovery, then it's like any other thing. If you want to say, I'm just throwing this out there as an example. If you want to say, get in shape for that 5K that you've been wanting to run all your life, then at some point you got to get off the couch, maybe start walking to start, and then eventually walk and run, and then eventually you're running and jogging, and then you can do the whole thing. You don't do it like all in one fell swoop. It takes time, but you can do it.
Yeah, step by step for sure. So, so we've talked about a lot of different things. What would you say is your one tip, for that person out there that wants to get just one step closer to essentially being their best self? What's your tip of the day, so to speak?
Well, I guess I would say is look at where you've been, right? And if what you've been doing hasn't worked, try something else. Because sometimes we think, well, why am I not getting better? Well, as the old saying goes, how's that working for you, right? In other words, say you've been against going to get therapy, or you hadn't wanted to try medication, but you're still stuck, right? Get unstuck, right? Get to the therapist, consider medication or other alternatives, exercise or things you may not have done. But sounds like to me, like if it's not working for you and you're feeling frustrated and you can't get going, do something different. And man, I've been that person that couldn't get out of bed. I've been that person that wasn't taking care of himself, but I did eventually do that. And you know what? It makes a world of a difference. It's one step at a time. It's like literally like just putting one foot in front of the other, as hard as it could be.
Yeah. Journey of 1,000 steps starts with what?
One.
That's first. Right. First step, man. So get up, do it. And with that, talking about taking steps, where can we find out more about the life and times and works of Karl Shallowhorn? Well,
you can follow me on LinkedIn. That's always a good place. I definitely post a lot there at Shallowhorn. Just look me under Karl Shallowhorn, my name. Also, my website is shallowhornconsulting.com. And also, Brian, I got to get a little plug for a book that I recently wrote called Leadership Through the Lens of the 12 Steps. It's available on Amazon, and it gets into the idea of what it means to develop as a leader and how to learn better ways to work with people.
Oh, I love that title. That's awesome. Don't worry, guys. If you didn't get all those that information, you can look in the show notes, and you'll find all of that, all of those links, and reference to the book and everything. So you can check the show notes. And with that, I want to thank you, Karl, for being on, and I also want to thank you, the listener, for rocking along on this journey with us. And I really wish you would help us out and hit this link and leave us a review. RateThisPodcast.com/unstuck. Leave us a review. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't. Tell us that what we're doing is what you want to hear. I will appreciate that very much. And once again, thanks again, Karl. This has been a great show. Lots of tips. And with that, peace, everybody.